Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to part 17 of Inclusiv's Town Hall series focused on the COVID-19 crisis and related relief efforts. My name is Jules Epstein-Hebert, the Director of Membership. Really pleased that you all could join us, and thank you for making the transition from GoToWebinar to the Zoom platform for this series. A couple bits of housekeeping before we get started. First things first, this session is being recorded. We will share the recording with everybody after the conclusion of this presentation, along with the slide deck, the slides that we'll be sharing with you all. So everyone who's registered will get access to that. We also are hoping to do question and answers towards the end of this presentation. We'd love to hear from our members with any questions, comments, stories you'd like to share. So feel free to use the Q&A tool for that, or raise your hand and we can unmute you and allow you to speak directly to the group if you have access to a microphone. Just going to advance to the agenda. Today's focus is subordinated debt, and of course when we talk about subordinated debt for credit unions, and specifically today's topic, we're focused on secondary capital. We'll be talking about the Treasury Department's ECIP, ECIP, the Emergency Capital Investment Program, and some of the resources that Inclusiv has available. Before we get into today's agenda, however, I did want to mention that Inclusiv is celebrating Black History Month this month by honoring the minority designated institution, the MDI credit union CEOs, board members, staff, and volunteers that are tirelessly fighting for social, economic, and racial equity in the communities they serve. So really want to shine a light on them. There will be a webinar later this month focused on the very important work that MDIs are doing and continue to do and will be doing in the future. We celebrate all of your work. So again, we'll be talking about the ECIP. Then we'll ask one of Inclusiv's members, River City FCU. We have the president and CEO, Jeff Ivey, who will be talking a little bit about how River City has used secondary capital in the past and give a little example of how it's used in action. Then we'll go into a little overview of the Inclusiv Capital Program and then with Ahmed Campbell, and then take some questions and audience discussion. But before we get into that all, I'd like to make a few announcements. First of all, as always, the Inclusiv site is a wealth of resources for CDCUs. So if you haven't checked it out recently, please check back. Make sure to check out the COVID-19 resources for CDCUs. Just want to welcome everybody back again. This is really an exciting time for our movement, and we're going to get into a lot of that in just a moment. Maybe I'll ask Pablo De Filippi, our SVP of Network Engagement, to share a little bit about some of the developments on the advocacy front. Inclusiv has been hard at work on these, and we're finally seeing the hard work bear some fruits. Pablo.
Thank you, Jules, and hello, everyone. You're right. We're really facing a historic moment for CDCUs, but also for the industry in general. The work that everyone has done last year in terms of responding to the pandemic, the work around the Paycheck Protection Program really propelled the visibility of CDFIs and credit unions to the next level. And that really resulted on these, resources that we have been talking about over the last few weeks. This work, again, is a recognition to the hard work of you all It's also a recognition to the work that we at Inclusiv have been leading with industry partners. As you know, our advocacy work has been um, done in coordination with some of our partners. CUNA Mutual Group has been a great ally, CUNA, NAFQ, some of the leagues that have been really active in terms of voicing the need, right, to support the work of mission-driven credit unions. So this all has resulted in this historic opportunity that we are celebrating. Of course, there's big challenges, right, in terms of how we can facilitate access to these resources. So the first um, part of this work has been accomplished, right? The resources are available. Now, how do we go about making sure that as many credit unions as possible can participate and benefit so they can use these resources to improve their communities and their members' well-being. So in terms of our advocacy work, as you know, we have been working around the clock, both with the U.S. Treasury Department and with the CDFI fund, both in terms of sending formal letters of recommendations, but also just trying to anticipate what are going to be some of the requirements that will determine, eligibility to participate in these programs. um, Last week, we talked about the rapid response program, and we're happy to see that the CDFI fund is busy reviewing certification applications. That's really encouraging because more and more credit unions will be able to participate in that first program. Now, in terms of the Treasury Department's emergency capital initiative program, we can see also that there's still fluid. There's a lot of questions more than answers. And if we move to the next slide, Jules, this is what we know so far. And Ahmed and Kathy will talk about this in more detail. But again, this is subordinated debt, right? 9 billion that the Treasury Department is going to deploy. Remember that it's not only credit unions that are going to be applying for these resources. CDFI banks will also do that. So it's important for us as an industry, as a movement, to make sure that we participate and tap into these resources that will be transformative, right, for many of you. We're looking at low cost, long-term secondary capital loans, right? So we're looking at, potentially 10 years terms, very low cost, at least initially. So these are all very positive indicators. Important to understand that you have to be low income designated, right? That's what gives you the authority to raise secondary capital. And also you have to be CDFI certified or MDI designated. Looks like for the CDFI certification, you are going to have to be certified as of December 31st, 2020 in order to participate. Again, this is still fluid. It could change. There's some materials that Treasury already published and made available. There's a link here that you can visit. Important to inform yourselves and understand the parameters of the program. If we move on to the next slide, what we have been asking Treasury is to really look at the Community Development Capital Initiative that they actually did in almost 10 years ago, right, in 2010. So we can learn and they can learn from that process because the goal here is to streamline the process, accelerate deployment, and expand impact. So we have in our letters and conversations with Treasury, we have asked to streamline the process, that there's no need for opinion letters from legal counsel, that those type of requirements just make the transaction more expensive, more complicated, and there's no need for that when we have NCUA that is already approving these plans. We also have been asking for more flexibility, less constraints around executive compensation. That was one of the biggest barriers for credit union participation in 2010. We're also asking Treasury to broaden the, um, the lending plan to take into account growth plans, secondary capital, as we're gonna learn from Ahmed and Kathy and Jeff. It's an accelerator of your institution's capacity, right? So these are things that we hope Treasury will take into account. We know from NCUA, right, that they will have two streams of approval, one for CIP applications and one for approval of secondary capital. We are in constant conversations with Treasury and also NCUA. We're collecting feedback from you guys. So please share what you have in your mind. It's not gonna work for us if it doesn't work for you. So your feedback and suggestions are extremely important. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jules.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pablo, for that overview of our efforts and the resources available. Now I'd like to ask my colleague, Kathy Kim, our Director of Inclusive Capital, to talk a little bit more in detail about the Emergency Capital Investment Program and how it'll work.
Great. Thanks so much, Jules, and everyone for sharing your afternoon with us. As Pablo mentioned, this is a tremendous moment for our movement, something that we at Inclusiv, our members and national CDFI partners have been advocating for. We know about how deeply community development credit unions reach into their communities and how you all have really shined to be the financial first responders during this confluence of crises. And programs such as the Emergency Capital Investment Program are something that we've been advocating for, to provide more capital to support the great work and leadership you all are doing in the deep pockets of some of our most underinvested communities. Jules, if you could get to the next slide, please. And so just to kind of pick up on a couple of threads and to speak more about the history and some of the key takeaways we got from the Community Development Capital Initiative, which was, I can't believe, more than a decade ago, which was really a proof of concept and was one of the key pieces, I think, that was helpful to Inclusiv in making sure that secondary capital was part of that capital appropriations under the new stimulus bill. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but just to give you all some context as to what happened in 2010 with a similar initiative that was led during the Obama administration. And really, the CDCI initiative was part of TARP. It was TARP 2, really geared and centered around CDFIs. Community development credit unions also participated in this. And Pablo shared just some of the key advocacy and resources that Inclusiv had shared and cultivated for Inclusiv members. And again, CDCI is different from ECIP, but really this was a successful model in helping demonstrate the proof of concept of how secondary capital and with CDCUs, we can do well by doing good. We helped advocate for secondary capital under this stimulus bill as well. And with CDCI, it was a bit different. And what we're really hopeful about with ECIP is just the increased amount and possible borrowing amounts for CDFIs and MDI credit unions. With CDCI, the total loan amount was capped at 3.5%, and the terms were between 8 and 13 years. It would depend on a few different criteria and assessments by Treasury as well as NCUA. But in a nutshell, this is what was actually rolled out to made available to CDFI credit unions, and was a moment where we saw a huge surge in CDFI credit unions as well as Inclusiv membership. So 48 CDFI credit unions participated in CDCI with a total of $70 million. About 40% of those credit unions were also minority designated. And about a third also had at least one branch and served persistent poverty counties where you have more than 3 decades in a row of a significant percentage of the communities living under the poverty threshold. So with CDCI, we saw that CDC is just really doing what they do best, growing, and Jules, if you could go to the next slide, growing both in terms of financial growth, but also community impact. And here you just have a quick snapshot, and some of you may have heard us share this before, but what we saw was that in looking at the impact over a 5-year period and the difference across financial impact, community lending, as well as development services, the credit unions that participated in CDCI actually outpaced the mainstream industry in terms of asset growth, also retained earnings and primary capital, because as we'll get into later and my colleague Ahmed will share, the secondary capital is a loan and does need to be repaid. And what we saw was that the secondary capital under CDCI was also a catalyst for that double bottom line growth, and the credit unions, all of them were able to repay the secondary capital loan. Not only that, they're able to sustain their growth and actually build their primary equity. You'll also see, and this was really powerful and I think instrumental in demonstrating that one of the many types of impacts CDCUs have is just how they leveraged the borrowings from the Treasury Department. That capital was leveraged more than 60 times over in terms of lending directly into LMI communities, and it expanded wealth creation opportunities. We know that home ownership is one of the primary ways that households are able to build wealth. And we saw that more than 800 million in mortgages were originated by these credit unions that participate in the CDCI program. Not only that, and you could read the impact metrics there, there was also a real surge in the scaling of different development services that CDCs like yours might provide, whether it's financial access and education, alternative to predatory loan products, credit building opportunities, so many critical development services that I think make us so successful in working with under-resourced and underinvested communities on that longer spectrum and pathway to financial empowerment. Next slide, Jules. And again, here, this is just some additional analysis that we've done. The COVID pandemic and everything we're experiencing now is something that's unprecedented, but I'm just trying to get the sense of, what happened during the last economic down cycle. Our research team did some analysis and just trying to see, what the financial trends and also the recovery process was for the industry, but also acutely CDFI credit unions and CDCUs. And what we saw, long story short, you have the data charts in front of you, where that CDFI credit unions actually outperformed and came out stronger out of this really challenging time in our economic history because of those 4 key components. One, the mission-centered leadership, knowing that amidst that uncertainty, just having a clear sense of what we're about, who we want to serve, and letting that be that North Star in developing our products and services, as well as our growth plans, continuing to lend, yes, while we have not yet seen that deterioration or impacts in delinquencies or charge-offs, we know that from the last economic down cycle, there was a provision expense increase, and we want to plan for that. And so in spite of all these factors, CDFI credit unions did come out stronger. So what are some of the key elements that were critical to that? We think having that additional capital, especially in light of the share growth that we've seen in the past year, will be a critical resource in being able to make the most of these opportunities and this momentous resource that has been included under the new appropriations bill. Jules, can you go to the next slide, please? So here I'm going to dive into really ECIP, and I know many of you participated also in the NCUA's webinar last week. And again, as Pablo mentioned earlier, disclaimer, the final application form and processes have not been developed, but the discussion here today and what we're going to walk through just really highlights what we know so far, and as well as a key resources that we're offering here to Inclusiv members and steps that you and your team can start to implement immediately in planning ahead should you decide to participate in ECIP. and other secondary capital opportunities that Ahmed will be walking through. So really high level, we're talking about $9 billion in capital. Everything I'm going to say is going to really kind of be about credit unions, but as Pablo mentioned, it's $9 billion for all federally insured depository institutions. So that also includes banks. So there's separate set-asides in attempts to make this process as equitable as possible. And really, it's right now it's broken out according to asset size. $2 billion set aside for, well, I'll just say credit unions, because that's who we're speaking with today. Credit unions with $500 million or less in assets. Another $2 billion for those between the $500 million to $2 billion in assets, and then the remaining for those with greater than $2 billion in assets. And the total amount that a credit union may be eligible to borrow is going to be fixed as a percentage of total assets. Now, this is the maximum your credit union will be eligible to apply for in terms of secondary capital under ECIP. Clearly, you will want to take into account different things such as your ability to repay this loan at maturity and the standing rules that apply to any type of secondary capital borrowings. So amongst the unknowns right now, we don't know what cutoff period they're going to be used in determining your total assets for this formula. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. But again, the amount that you want to apply for really is going to depend on your strategic plan as well as your growth and impact strategy. Next slide, please, Jules. And so really, what are the rates and terms? Again, more details to come, but what we know is according to NCUA regulations, the minimum term is 5 years. The maximum term, we don't know yet, and maybe 10 years. What we've seen so far in the appropriations bill is that it's 2% for the first 10 years. We know with CDCI, the loan terms went up to 13, but that's something that has not yet been determined yet. It's also going to be interest-free and non-accrual for the first 24 months, and that 24-month clock is going to start ticking from the loan origination date, not the application date. So there's some benefits there as well, in addition to the really low market interest rates that are being offered here. In addition to that, there are additional incentives and interest rate adjustments that will be made available to borrowing credit unions, and that will depend on your actual lending and impact metrics specifically to these target markets, communities of color, rural and urban, low income, and otherwise historically communities, underserved communities that serve LMI borrowers. So if your lending increases more than 2 to 4 times of the secondary capital loan amount that you're getting under ECIP, your interest rate's going to be less than or equal to 1.25%. And again, it goes down to 50 basis points if your lending increases more than 4 times the capital investment. For example, let's say you got $1 million in secondary capital under ECIP. If you're lending to those target markets increases by more than 4 times that, or $4 million, then it's expected right now that the annual interest payment is going to be reduced to 50 basis points. Next slide, please, Jules. So really, who's eligible? So we mentioned earlier, specifically with this program, it's designed as part of a larger response to the impact of the COVID pandemic, but also really taking into account to, while we've all been impacted, who has been disproportionately impacted. And what we've seen time and time again has been LMI communities as well as communities of color. And so that's affected the eligibility of who will be eligible to apply for secondary capital under ECIP. So either CDFI certified or you're minority designated. Again, we don't know what the cutoff period is, but according to the NCUA webinar last week, they're saying right now it seems to be you must have that certification or designation as of 12/31/2020. CDFI certification, you can check the CDFI Fund's website or your AMIS account. Minority designation, that is a self-designation, and you could double check that by going to the NCUA website and downloading your most recent profile. If you need help doing that, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to walk you through that. And then the 3 other conditions are, and this applies to both CDFIs and MDIs, in totality, you must be federally insured. We don't have information as to whether, cooperativas regulated by COSEC will apply, but right now we've just seen specific callouts for credit unions under NCUA. So being federally insured, you must be low income designated. And while that's not specifically fleshed out under the ECIP application, that is a standing requirement under secondary capital plans and NCUA's regulations. Last but not least, there's also some determinations that will be made in order to qualify. In addition to meeting those three parameters I just walked through, you must not be in troubled condition, and they're using the definition under CFR 700.2. So what that really means is if you're CAMEL 4 or 5, you will not be eligible. Also, if you currently have Section 208 assistance, you will not be eligible. In addition to that, if your credit union is currently subject to a formal enforcement regarding unsafe or unsound lending practices, you will not be eligible. So we highly recommend, and we say this for our secondary capital partners and borrowers, even outside of ECIP, make sure you know your standing with your regulator. You may want to let your examiner or your regulator know that this is something that you're interested in, so that does not come as a surprise to them. While I'm sure there's coordination across NCUA and CURE and the regional directors, it's always great to let folks know that you are interested in applying, so that they are also prepared, and that situations that are addressed and that final sort of set of criteria don't come as a surprise. So we just want you and your team to be prepared for that. Next slide, please, Jules. Yep, so here, again, while the ECIP program is being facilitated by the Department of Treasury, because secondary capital, it's going to be invested in the form of secondary capital, which you must receive approval from your regulator. That's NCUA for federally chartered credit unions. And if you're state chartered, you need approval from both. And so what we laid out here are just some really high level components, and just to lay out that you're going to eventually need 3 separate plans that are all related, but one, there's the emergency capital investment program application and that lending plan that goes to Treasury, but also, and the contents of that are going to be included and related to your secondary capital plan that you'll have to submit to your regulators. And within that, when you read through NCUA 701.34, which is a set of regulations that govern secondary capital, you must also demonstrate that the secondary capital plan conforms to your strategic plan and attach that as part of your secondary capital plan. Here, in terms of submission process, again, what was shared in the webinar last week is that's going to be a dual process review system. We don't have all the details, but what we do know so far is that the ECIP application must be uploaded separately to a portal that will be created from the Department of Treasury. That does not yet exist. More information to come on that. What has been shared so far is that application window will be about 2 months. Again, that's not finalized, but that's what's been shared so far. On the other end, with NCUA and your state regulators, according to federal regulations, NCUA has about up to 45 days to respond. Your state probably does have that same requirement, but again, it depends. You're going to want to check your state regulations as well. And you have the key contacts there. For ECIP, there is a standing email address that you should use, but please note that NCUA's CURE team will also be involved in the process, and they're the ones who will be communicating the status update on your ECIP application. Not to make this more complicated, but with regards to your secondary capital plan, that should be communicated and submitted to your regional director. And if you are state chartered, also make sure to first send that to your state examiner, but send it to both. That was recommended from last week's webinar. And again, there's no guarantee here, but based on what was shared on the webinar last week, they're aiming for a total turnaround time of 60 days and encourage folks to send their secondary capital plan no later than 2 weeks after you submit your ECIP application to Treasury. But again, as we kind of fleshed out, just given the key considerations and components of these plans, you probably are going to work on them almost concurrently, and they're going to feed off of each other as your team kind of works through that. Next slide, please, Jules. So really high level, again, the application is not yet finalized, but there has been a draft that was shared on the Treasury Department's website. And if you don't have a copy, we'll include this in our follow-up email to you. But there's a draft of the actual application and the lending plan. Not going to go through everything right now, and we are going to have Q&A later, but I think one of the like most common areas where we're getting questions around is around the emergency investment lending plan. So really it's broken out into 4 key questions. One is lending to LMI, low moderate income and other targeted populations. There's a key set of definitions in the application that you should take a look at. 2, you have to flesh out your business strategy to address community development needs. 3, your actual emergency lending plan. And 4, to walk through your strategy and your plans around community outreach and communication. Specifically, how are you going to market and reach out to and engage the target communities, LMI borrowers, and communities of color that have been disparately impacted by COVID as part of your overall lending plan. So here I'm going to dive into just some resources that we have here at Inclusiv. Next slide, please, Jules. So one area that we've gotten a lot of questions and some concerns about are with regards to questions 1 and 3, which is the lending impact and projections. If you are CDFI, you're exempt from answering questions 1. However, if you're minority designated, you will have to provide some data based on the past 2 fiscal years in terms of the number and dollar amount of your lending going into these target communities. The reasoning behind that is because of the process behind CDFI certification and that annual recertification process through which you are providing data and demonstrating that more than 60% of your loans are going into these underinvested communities. And then in question 3, they're asking for just a part of your pro forma to demonstrate how much of your overall lending, your total originations over the next 3-year horizon, but also breaking out specifically how much are you planning to lend specifically into these target communities. And so next slide, please, Jules. Your team may already have this resource, but this is one thing that our team was be able to really pivot quickly around, and just want to give a shout out to our research fellow Zian Chan and Terry Ranigan, our senior consultant. For Inclusiv members, we offer free CDFI annual certification reporting services, as well as lending analysis. And our team was quickly able to pivot and break out some additional metrics to help you, provide you and your team, if you send us your lending data, a breakout of those key lending metrics, which you can use to complete the application, but also, kind of think out your impact and your growth opportunities as well as strategy. So that is one really tangible resource that our team's ready to offer. If you're not currently a member, let us know. Jules is our director of membership, and we're actually offering some discounted membership rates, especially to minority designated credit unions and some smaller credit unions as well. Next slide, please, Jules. So, there are other components to the investment lending plan, such as your business strategy and how you're going to address community development, as well as the narrative around the lending plan, community outreach and communication. So really, what are some key things that your credit union can start to do to put this in place or help you and your team, as we wait for the application to be finalized? What are some actionable steps that can be taken in helping you make that decision? And or if you've already made that decision, actually put together the application. Again, 1, sign up for the ACR, and our team will provide you with that lending data analysis. 2, look at impact and reflect on the past year. We've worked with, and heard from so many of our members. There are different approaches being taken to strategic plans, but I think just look at what you have so far in terms of your strategic plan. Maybe you are, revising it. Maybe you've already made addendums, but you want to take a look at what you have so far in terms of the key materials you'll need. Look back on your COVID response. We've seen so many different examples of the way CDCUs have stepped up, whether it's loan modifications, deferments, emergency loans. It's just such a broad spectrum. Take that and sort of like document it. It's also required for the lending plan, but also it's going to help you and your team with the general strategic planning process as we move forward on this recovery process. So I think this is just a really great opportunity and spotlight on the impact of CDCUs. It's our moment to continue to shine and be recognized for the tremendous work you all have been doing, especially as financial first responders during the pandemic. And also ask, if you have the capital, what would be necessary to help you and your team accomplish and go even deeper into community? It's a chance to reimagine, rebuild, and recreate, and restore the communities that we've served, and do it in a way where we are, reaching deeply and touching all of our members, including those that have historically not been well served, and just go deeper in impact, and also do in a way where you are working towards the continued growth and sustainability of your credit union through that double bottom line and lens. And next is just really a high level overview. Next slide, please, Jules. Of really, and Ahmed and Jeff will speak more to this, but for us at Inclusiv, and just like our history as being the first and longest standing lender of secondary capital, the findings that I shared with regards to CDCI, we've seen the same within our own partnerships. And my 14 years at Inclusiv and working with over 30 credit unions throughout this process, we've seen that secondary capital, coupled with your leadership and your mission and focus, can be a tremendous partnership for having that double bottom line and catalyzing that purpose-driven growth. And here are just like some 5 key takeaways as to best practices for using secondary capital. So I'll pause there and turn it back to you, Jules.
Thank you, Kathy, for that overview. Now I'd like to, well, Kathy, did you want to introduce our next speaker?
Sure, it's my pleasure to introduce you all, although I'm sure you've heard his name before and just seen him in the credit union press. Jeff Ivey, who's the president and CEO of River City Federal Credit Union, a CDFI certified credit union, minority designated institution, and one of our members of the Juntas Avanzamos program, as well as one of our secondary capital partners and investees. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Jules, Ahmed, Pablo, and everybody. It is an exciting time to be a CDFI, that's for sure. We have a lot of programs that are available to us. We're looking through the information about the program that you just covered, and are excited by some of the potential that we think that offers us. Our view at River City is now is the time to take advantage of the variety of programs offering support to CDFIs. It's encouraging to see the level of resources that are becoming available to us all, and it enables all of us to really enhance our outreach and enhance the important work that CDFIs are doing. I'll say that Inclusiv has played a huge role in the SBA Paycheck Protection Program process here in the second round, as we've navigated some changes that have kind of created some hurdles, if you will, in the process. But we're getting those worked out, and we're really very appreciative of all the work that Inclusiv has done along those lines. Now, about secondary capital, I think if there are credit unions that have not participated in a secondary capital effort and are wondering about it, I can share our experience with Inclusiv on this. It was a great process. It was an easy process as well. It pushed us towards really refining and getting deeper into our strategic plan, setting expectations for what we needed to achieve in order to put the capital to best use. And right now, as we're still in a pandemic and we're still a lot of economic uncertainty out there, we think that getting some secondary capital on your balance sheet's just a great idea. Knock on wood, we haven't seen losses or delinquency really increase. In fact, they've kind of gone the other way. But we we're trying to prepare ourselves as best we can, not knowing how much longer, the pandemic will, have the negative impact on our economy that it's having. And we just want to be prepared for that. And that led us to the discussion with Ahmed and Kathy about what was available in the secondary capital program. And, as we went through the process with Inclusiv, like I said, it was a very easy process, and it made sense. And which wasn't surprising, knowing it was coming from Inclusiv, that it was easy and made sense, because Inclusiv understands what CDFIs are all about, and what we're going through and what we're trying to do. We're putting that capital to good use. We have we were able to finish off some new lending programs for our members that get deeper into into some of the credit tiers and uncover some of the really glaring needs that our members face on a daily basis. And having the support of Inclusiv and having the secondary capital on board has been, that's been a really, really positive development for us. We still have to go through the NCUA to get the approval to do it. That was an easy process as well. Fortunately, we have a very good relationship with our examiner. He understood what we were doing. Really just basically took the same information that we gave to Inclusiv and used that for the NCUA to make the decision to approve what we were doing. But I just think that now is the time. If you've not done it before, now is the time to think about it. What Inclusiv offers and what the Treasury Department is going to be rolling out. Again, it's exciting stuff for CDFIs, and it can really bolster what you're doing in reaching new members, especially in underserved areas. We certainly have that here in San Antonio. San Antonio is a huge city, but it's estimated that about 220,000 individuals are classified as financially underserved or unbanked here. And it takes some capital to reach those individuals and to put the programs together that are going to directly benefit them. I mean, we go toe to toe with predatory lenders every day in this market. And, with Inclusiv's help, we've been able to, like I said, create some different auto lending programs that are getting people out of buy here, pay here auto loans. We've been able to push out more signature loans to get people out of payday lending situations. It's really been beneficial to us. And I can't emphasize enough, the process is very easy. And I think we're excited about the Treasury Department offering, because looks like a lot of the same information that we created with our Inclusiv application will be put to use with that. And, we're going to take advantage of it. The CDFI designation is not just a badge on our website. It is what we do. It is baked into everything we do, into our mission, into our vision for our community, and in our daily activities. And to see the support, not just from the federal government, but from Inclusiv on really helping us to enhance what we do, couldn't be happier with that. Couldn't have been happier with the process. And Kathy and Ahmed were there every step of the way to answer questions and make sure we were on track with everything. So I thank both of you so much for that. And Ahmed, I think I'll turn it over to you for some additional comments on it.
Thanks, Jeff. Boy, if you could see me, I'm over here. I'm blushing, but just thank you so much for just sharing your clear and compelling testimony. The experience that Jeff shared aligns, with the purpose of Inclusiv Capital. which is to provide capital to strengthen the capacity of CDCUs and furthering our mission, which is your mission of helping low to moderate income individuals and the communities achieve financial independence. And just hearing from him that testimony that allowed our secondary capital, allowed River City to go deeper, into opportunities that, might have been avoided under circumstances where secondary capital was not available to be leveraged. So thanks again, Jeff, for that. I'm going to try to collect myself and continue on through this. For the high level, because secondary capital is an involved process, I appreciate Jeff's comments that Inclusiv made it easy, but it's still going to require some coveralls. There's going to be some work on your part. Secondary capital in itself, it's subordinated debt. It's the loan. It's treated as equity for regulatory purposes, serving as a catalyst for growth and helping you scale the financial growth initiatives, as well as expanding the social impact of your credit union-led financial inclusion initiatives. These loans, they start from 5 years to maturity. And as the first graph shows, 20% of the loan is discounted and booked as notes payable. Now, Inclusiv offers two types of secondary capital products. Again, the first grid you see is our secondary capital one, or the balloon repayment. This is available to all credit unions, but for credit unions that have a lower composite CAMEL rating that is lower than 2, it would be essentially the type of loan for secondary capital that you'd be looking at. The amortized repayment, or the streamlined approval process, is secondary capital 2. This is for credit unions with a composite CAMEL of a 1 or a 2. Now, you'll need to self-certify that you have a composite CAMEL rating of 1 or 2. We're not going to ask you that question, but certainly you know the condition of your credit union. We're just pleased to be able to offer both opportunities for credit unions. Now, secondary capital 1 borrowers, while they are also encouraged to repay the amortized portions, they're also expected to make a balloon repayment at maturity. And for the financial folks that are on the call, it is counted as debt for GAAP, but as equity for the purposes of calculating your net worth until the final 5 years before maturity. So as the graph shows, in the last 5 years of the term, you're counting it at 80, 60, 40, 20, and 0 of par value, respectively. The next slide. So let's just walk you through the secondary capital application process. Again, this is at a very high level, and some of this Kathy touched on, even Jeff touched on in his testimony. But we look at this as the blueprint. Inclusiv, being the first and longest standing lender of secondary capital, has developed what we view as the blueprint for secondary capital through our application process. Secondary capital applicants approved by Inclusiv's credit committee have experienced a 99% success rate of their secondary capital loan plan upon submission to the NCUA. So that said, if you look at each one of these train cars, as I like to look at it metaphorically, the first step is where many of you are, or you're finalizing that process, which is developing the long-term strategy for the use of the secondary capital. This is your strategic and business plan formation process. These are things that you're already doing. So along with completing the application that we walk you through, you're preparing your business, your community impact plan, along with your financial projections for the full requested term of the loan. And when we talk about strategic and business plan formation, and again, this is what the NCUA is going to be looking at, you want to have quantifiable and measurable statements of your business community impact plan. My take, if it's not quantifiable, if it's not measurable, it's probably not strategic. So you can stick a pin in that. But what we see is there's an opportunity today for credit unions to work with Inclusiv on their secondary capital needs, using our process as that blueprint to obtain secondary capital from Inclusiv, in addition to the Treasury's offering through the ECIP. So once you've developed your long-term strategy for the use of the secondary capital, you're completing your application, you're applying and you're securing funding with Inclusiv. Now, this isn't the absolute process. Again, I'm just sharing with you that credit unions that have taken this path have enjoyed that 99% success rate. I'm making the case, you make the decision. So you've applied, you've secured your funding from Inclusiv. Now you're submitting your secondary capital plan to the NCUA. Now, again, go back to what Kathy Kim shared earlier on. This would be that 2-week post process after you have submitted your ECIP. Now both processes are in motion. Your secondary capital plan, and I will review Reg 701.34 with you so that you understand these are the particulars that the NCUA is really looking for, but we pretty much check off those boxes as you're doing your application with us before you send it out to the NCUA. I would also mention you want to consult if you're state chartered, you want to speak to your state supervisor to make certain that they're aware of that process along the way. Communication just seems like it's been the winning formula. When everyone is aware of what's going on, it kind of like helps to grease the skids for you and move your process through a lot more efficiently and effectively. So once you get back that secondary capital plan approval, I'm speaking positive in here, we're talking about a 45-day window that, according to the most recent webinar we were on, NCUA is not changing that. So that 45 days period of the NCUA reviewing your secondary capital plan is included within that full 60-day period of review. So you're not going to add 45 days on to the 60 days. It will be included within that. So post that 60-day period, your 45 days running concurrently along with this process. Now you are approved. Now Inclusiv is going to prepare your closing documents. This is where you're going to receive your disclosure, your acknowledgement form. And from us, you're going to get your loan agreement because you want to know how much is it going to cost us. Your promissory note, along with your disclosure and an acknowledgement form and your board authorization. And then last, but perhaps the most important part of this, getting back to what Jeff spoke about, is executing that long-term strategy. This is where the rubber meets the road, because now you actually have that secondary capital that you're able to leverage to go deeper than you've ever gone before, to reach those communities that have been living in financial deserts, or where there are those types of predatory lending products that really are not in their best interest. This is where you're able to now launch out into that deep blue and start making the impact that your credit union is all about. And certainly, again, going back to that first train car, you develop your strategy. You've looked at everything that you need to do to actually make sure that you've got a quantifiable and a measurable statement of what you intend on achieving. And now it's going to be tracked at that first car in terms of the execution of your long-term strategy. Next slide, please. So again, secondary capital, the eligibility, it's limited to the low income designated credit unions, and you must submit and receive approval of your secondary capital plan by your NCUA regional director. And again, you want to go and speak to your state supervisor as necessary. So, if you haven't already considered this or had a conversation, you want to include that along the way. The secondary capital plan requirements, the 5 that are listed here, the maximum amount is stated. You're identifying the purpose for which the aggregate secondary capital will be used and how it will be repaid. Yes, it's debt, but when you're putting everything together, you're going to really see how secondary capital plan is good debt. It's something that's going to help you in leveraging the initiatives, but also pay for itself and then some. When we get an opportunity, and if we can schedule some time together, certainly email the capital team, and we'll take a deeper dive, because we'd like to be able to show you really where the numbers actually match up with this, and it actually does pay for itself and then some. And 3, you're going to give the explanation on how you're going to provide liquidity to repay the secondary capital upon its maturity, and demonstrating that the plan uses the secondary capital conform to your strategic plan, your business plan, and your budget. That includes also providing your pro forma financial statements and any off-balance sheet items covering a minimum of the next 2 years. So, with that said, Jeff, really, I'm trying to do the virtual hug to you, but it's really about seizing the moment. Carpe diem. But I want to share with you is that, there's new regulations for subordinated debt that go into effect January 2022. And from our perspective, the process to obtain secondary capital will be impaired, with smaller credit unions probably bearing a substantial burden under these new regulations. So it's not to ring the alarm bell and say that you must rush in, but in terms of the time that you're going to take to analyze this, we would just encourage you to perhaps collapse that a little bit more and reach out to us, because we'd certainly like to be able to help as many credit unions as we possibly can. So again, thank you for your time. Jules, I'll turn that back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ahmed, for that overview of Inclusiv's offerings. I'm just going to turn my video back on as we get into the final portion of our discussion. Just a reminder, the next town hall is on March 9th, but we'll be having webinars in between now and then on specific topics around Black History Month and the work of MDIs, as well as on the Rapid Response Program grants from the CDFI fund that should be announced by February 25th. So we hope to see you back in these future webinars, and especially on Tuesday, March 9th for the next session in the Town Hall series. We are coming up at the hour. But I know that secondary capital, subordinated debt, the emergency capital investment program are all very complex topics. So this is being recorded, and I'm going to ask if our panelists can stay on just a few minutes past the scheduled end of our webinar. We will continue recording and addressing questions, and you can view them at your leisure if you have to hop off early. With that, we did have some questions come in, and so I'm going to ask the panelists for your assistance in responding to these, but I will share them with you. The first question is for the Emergency Capital Investment Program. This is for Kathy Kim. The reduction in interest rate for increase in lending, what is the period for increase in lending? Is it each year, 10 years, or what?
Sure, no, that's a great question. And that's one of the devil's in the details. We don't have that information yet, but we'll be certain to keep that on our list as we continue to have discussions with the Treasury team.
Thank you, Kathy. Now, just give me a moment. Sorry about that. It sounds like the term of secondary capital is 10 years, interest free for the first 24 months, and then 2% after that. Is any principal repaid during the 10 years, or is it all due at the end of 10 years?
Sure. So there are a few different points kind of rolled up in that. And I agree. I think it probably is going to be 10 years, but when you read the actual legislation, it says it literally says 2% for the first 10 years. And then in another clause, it says that there's no interest accrued in the first 2 years. But I agree. I'm seeing a few different comments coming in about that. In terms of the actual principal repayments, it depends. Right now, I think that's something that we at Inclusiv would advocate for. And under standard secondary capital borrowings, you are able to request to redeem or repay the amortized portions. You're no longer counting towards secondary capital. The only thing I would say for certain is that because they're going to be using the secondary capital regulations and framework, is that you would not be able to repay any portion that has not yet amortized. But again, we won't know. I know with CDCI, there were certain carve-outs and exceptions made, changes made to the to 701.34, for example, and this is just for to serve an example. With regards to secondary capital, usually like all lenders experience loss, if any, pro rata, but with CDCI, Treasury was given a more senior position. So great question. Short answer, we'll continue to ask for clarification around that, but we think there are benefits to getting some early repayment options there.
Thanks, Kathy. A bunch more questions coming in. Will Inclusiv or some other organization, probably Inclusiv, provide technical assistance with the application process for smaller MDIs?
Sure. So I feel like we could kind of tag team on that one, Jules and Ahmed. I'll kind of kick us off. As I mentioned earlier, as for all Inclusiv members, and Jules, I believe we have a special, offerings for MDI credit unions that I hope you could kind of share with folks on the line today. But all members receive free ACR and lending analysis. So that's something that we're making available to all of our members, including the MDIs. I think also there are other technical assistance related components to this. As Ahmed shared and Jeff shared his experience working with us, while Inclusiv does not provide these specific consulting services through our secondary capital program, the way we've designed our application process, while we don't write secondary capital plans for folks, we've designed a process to kind of guide folks through the process and give some feedback as to areas to flesh out, so that everything that we know about their impact and the high level points about the strategic plan are reflected in the secondary capital plan. The secondary capital loan made to invested in River City was under our Inclusiv Racial Equity and Resilience Fund, which is providing below market rate secondary capital to MDIs and credit unions that are serving communities of color. So through that program, we are able to offer some technical assistance to MDIs. And please feel free to reach out to Ahmed or myself for additional details there. Jules, Ahmed, is there anything else you want to add with regards to our TA specifically for MDIs?
My TA around MDIs is not related to secondary capital. It's related to CDFI certification. So we certainly offer a lot of assistance for MDIs that are trying to get CDFI certified. And we run a free eligibility analysis for our member credit unions. So that's something, if you're not CDFI certified, to certainly take advantage of. We encourage you, if you're an MDI, not yet CDFI certified, but would like to take advantage of some of these resources, now is really the time. We'd love to help you. So please reach out to myself or one of my colleagues, and we'll get you the assistance you need. Also, to Kathy's point earlier, for non-members, credit unions up to $100 million in assets and MDI credit unions up to $150 million in assets, we are offering, if you're joining us with the intention of getting CDFI certified and taking part in these programs, we're offering a 50% membership dues discount for the first year of membership. This question, Kathy, back to the first 2 years interest, is it interest free or interest deferred for ECIP? It looks like just interest deferred according to the actual bill.
So again, always good to have things in writing. What was shared during the NCUA webinar, and again, this is a great question, and please keep them coming. I know we're 5 minutes over time. If you have any additional questions that don't get answered, please email us at capital@inclusiv.org. But my understanding that it's non-accrual. It's not like after 2 years after the origination date, all that interest that you would have paid for the first 2 years would come due. My understanding is that it's non-accrual. So it's interest-free for the first 2 years, as someone else had written in the chat. Okay, and someone else, Joe Arnold, thank you, Joe. Directly from Donovan at Treasury, 2% is non-accrual for first 24 months. And so, okay, again, we are gonna look to get that in writing, but I think we have a few folks who are kind of corroborating on what we've heard, but absolutely we wanna get that in writing to kind of reassure folks and help you all, calculate the cost ROA and the benefits from, leveraging secondary capital here.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you, Joe. One question, and I'll attempt to answer this, Kathy. The NCOA mentioned there will be restrictions like there was with TARP, including executive compensation. What are those restrictions? I believe the answer is we don't know yet what they will be. Kathy, do you have anything to add?
No, but just that we are aware of the impact it had on CDCI. And clearly we're talking about CDFI credit unions and MDIs. That's not really our thing. So we want to make sure it's equitable and reasonable. And we have advocated for reasonable terms or the lifting of this requirement before this was legislated, but also now. Yeah, but we don't have details on what that the executive compensation requirements might be like. But if you want a frame of reference, and again, it may not necessarily be what was included under TARP. Reach out to me. Happy to send you the resources there so you can kind of see what the executive comp and the golden parachute clauses were. That was really a spillover from TARP 1, which is, as you know, really for Wall Street. Totally different industry and environment. Nevertheless, it did impact us.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. So the capital investment may be used for non-lending activity. How exactly is that stipulation structured? Kathy, you able to take that on?
Sure. So I think that's something we still are, and if anyone else has additional information, please feel free to chime in under the chat. But I don't think it's been totally fleshed out. I know that under the lending plan, they are asking for, under that overall like leveraged impact and use of the capital investment funds. It includes things like, giving out grants or for forbearances, deferments, and things like that. But I think additional clarification on those points would be very helpful and necessary.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. Under CDCI, the debt only served to lower our net worth ratio at the end, as we were left with the debt which could not be used as capital. Will ECIP be the same?
Yeah, great question, Michael.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Ahmed, do you want to take that one?
As I was reading it and I saw Michael's question, this is one of the things that we looked at. ECIP on its own is not treated, as equity. So that's that second part of it that we were talking about in terms of now having that secondary capital plan approved that incorporates the ECIP so that you would be able to include that as towards your net worth. So I think that's really the really important piece that I'm hoping that people caught on, either if you were on the NCUA's webinar or when we were covering that back on ours. But a very good question. As we see it, the ECIP, in addition to actually the secondary capital plan, that will allow you to actually include that in terms of as equity for your net worth.
Great, thank you, Ahmed. Thank you to our special guest, Jeff Ivey with River City FCU, the president and CEO, and thank you to my colleagues, Kathy Kim, our Director of Inclusive Capital, Ahmed Campbell, our Director of Lending Development, and Pablo De Filippi on the screen before you, our SVP of Membership and Network Engagement. I'm Jules Epstein-Hebert, the Director of Membership. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We will be sharing the recording and slides with all of you soon, and we hope to see you all next month. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care.